I'm welcoming you to our SUG Columbus, and this is the 50th session in 4 years. So we have reached a milestone 50th session. We have been active since quite a long time in the community, trying to have at least minimum one session every month. So with that, we have reached more than 440 members on our community portal. That is KOMMUNITY community, and you can search SUG Columbus on that, and you can join our group on that. So you will have details about our next session. Today in our 50th session, we have Andrew View. Andrew is a very well-known name in our Sitecore community, and most people know him as the Sitecore trainer. He has trained a huge number of people. Like literally, I would say that in last 5 years, more than 50% would have been trained by him, all the certified professional. He has been giving training on XM Cloud and Sitecore XP, all the developer sessions. And today we have an advantage of having him in the session. He's going to present about Sitecore workflow. It is really a critical, but it's a small piece, but it's so much critical to make the content secure and processes. And I'll hand over to Andrew for the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maulik. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and can I get a confirmation that everyone can see this?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So I will just get right into it. We're going to be talking about workflows that work. And the agenda here, my goal is to answer a number of questions today. So I'll start talking about just what is a workflow exactly. I'll talk about the benefits and some potential pitfalls. And if you're not sure whether you have a workflow or not, I'll show you how you can find out and then how you can get started with workflow. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about how you can take your workflows to the next level with some advanced actions. So thanks everybody for joining, and thanks everyone who is watching on the YouTubes afterwards. So let's get right into it. Just what are workflows? And so my obvious answer there is to go straight to the dictionary definition, is that workflow is the sequence of processes that work passes through from initiation to completion. So that's the general idea of workflows. Now in Sitecore, workflows are very specific entity. So workflows essentially define your content approval process. Architecturally, a workflow is a series of predefined states that are defined as items that a piece of content must pass through before it can be published. Every state represents a step in the review process. So in this example, we have editing, reviewing, and published are our states. Commands move content between these states. So we can approve or reject a piece of content that would either send it back to editing or move it to published. And then we also have actions assigned to our workflows, which can trigger API calls or webhooks when changes occur. So in Sitecore, yeah, these workflows, states, commands, and actions are all defined as items that are under the settings node in the content tree. So that is where you would find all of your workflows in the content editor, whether you're on XP or XM Cloud. So now that we know what workflows are, let's talk about the benefits. So in short, the number one benefit is that workflows prevent that unwanted publication and ensure that all content receives proper approval before it goes live. So without workflow, your content is basically publishable from the moment it's created. So if you create a blog post, and then seconds later, a colleague publishes the blog, your newly created post that still probably contains default content is going to be published, like we see in the screenshot here. Presumably this paper was not printed with Sitecore and they didn't have proper workflow. But beyond preventing accidents, workflow ensures that content needs to be validated by, a QA or QC or a legal department or any number of different audiences. So until it's validated, that content absolutely cannot go live until it's received proper approval. So workflows add a layer of protection and accountability that keeps your content teams aligned and confident in what is being published. Um, it adds a layer of human intelligence to your publishing process, which is especially important as more and more of our content is being written and created with AI. Well, we need human oversight on that content, or you can run into some pretty bad situations. I don't need to go through all of them. You don't want to accidentally push a result that takes down hundreds of thousands of websites, and that is something that feels like it's so common these days. You might not even know what company I'm talking about. It's happened so often. So again, that oversight here to make sure that we're not pushing out content until it's received proper approval and that a human has actually signed off on that. Another benefit of workflow is that it can be simple or as complex. It can be as simple as or as complex as you want them to be. So the simplest possible workflow consists of two states. We have one initial state and one final state, and then a single command to approve the item. This would be a workflow where it just prevents that unwanted publishing and allows you to make sure that that content doesn't get published even accidentally until you're ready for it to be published. And then, of course, they can also be very complex, requiring sign-off from multiple departments. So there's no limit to the number of states within a workflow or the number of workflows that you can create. So you can have different workflows for different types of content. Maybe a blog post doesn't need as much approval as a product needs a product page. And then with the granular permissions of Sitecore, you can also customize those workflows to specific user types. So like maybe associate editors need to go through more steps than a senior editor, for example. You have a lot of customization options available to you with workflow. Another benefit, it's worth mentioning that workflows operate largely the same on both XP and XM Cloud, with some minor exceptions that I'll mention later. So if you're on XP and thinking about transitioning to XM Cloud, there's no need to hold off on workflows. Your workflows are going to work mostly the same. The exception might be with some automation. We'll talk about that again, as I mentioned later. And then my absolute favorite part about workflow is the automatic versioning. So workflows facilitate automatic versioning, which makes it easier to store a history of changes and edits. The way that it works is when somebody makes a change to a page that has been approved via workflow, Sitecore will automatically create a new version, and then that version needs to go through that same approval process before it's going to overwrite the currently approved version on the live site. So now let's talk about some downsides, because of course, there are some things you need to watch out for. So the first thing to mention, while workflow is incredibly helpful in preventing errors, workflows will not help you launch your site faster. It is quite the opposite there. Workflows intentionally slow you down for the purposes of making sure that your content updates are accurate. So if you're launching a new website and you need to move fast, this is an easy task to move into phase 2. The idea is we'll get to that when the website is done. Folks will think, only to discover that you are never actually done with the website. So again, yeah, it makes sense to often put that off if you're trying to launch the site quickly, But the problem there is once the decision is made to skip those workflows, it's very easy to continue putting it off. It's rarely an urgent need, and especially if your business users learn to use Sitecore in a workflow-free environment, they might not even know it's an option. They might just, be used to knowing that you have to be careful with when you create that content. So another downside, sort of, is that someone on the team needs to understand security. So not necessarily you, not necessarily even the person designing the workflow, but at some point, someone is going to need to assign that permissions, whether that's an admin or a developer on your team or someone from your partner. So in the language of the security editor, which is the tool you would use to assign these permissions in Sitecore, you need to understand how to set workflow state delete, workflow state write, and workflow command execute. I won't be going into detail on these, but in short, these permissions are going to determine who can delete, edit, or execute workflow commands when an item is in a given workflow state. So, for example, while your item is awaiting approval, I should not be able to approve the page on my own, but maybe I should be able to self-reject that content. If I notice that there is a mistake, I might want to reject it, send it back to draft, so that QA person does not waste their time proofreading the page when it already has an error. Now, at the risk of sending mixed messages, I'm going to point out that my favorite feature of workflow, automatic versioning, can also be a downside if you are not careful. This is especially possible if you have a simple two-state workflow, like the one I'm going to be talking about, where you can approve your own content, the one that I mentioned earlier as well. So if you're frequently submitting your changes, approving your changes, and then making another quick change, it is fairly easy for those version numbers to get out of control fairly quickly, which can slow down your content management instance. You'll want folks to know how to delete old unneeded versions, or maybe have a process in place for automating the deletion of old versions. It's also worth mentioning another downside is that workflow is less useful if everyone is an admin. So this is another one of those things that often happens at the beginning of an implementation and maybe never gets changed after the fact. Folks figure they'll work out permissions and roles and all of that later. But for now, moving quickly, we'll just make everyone an admin so that everyone can do all the things they need to do. So this is risky for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because it gives everybody the ability to completely break your website. But in the context of this presentation, it kind of defeats the purpose of workflow in a few different ways. So for one, since admins bypass all security, there's no real enforcement of that workflow. Anyone can approve their own content. So if you have a complex series of steps where different departments need to sign up, there's nothing from just preventing me from approve, and bypassing all those departments if I'm an admin. The other downside is there is no automatic versioning. So admins can edit items that are in a final state. So if you edit an approved item or approved page, it won't go through that validation process. You'll just edit the item in its final state. You'll have no version history, and that will be publishable from the moment you create. So a few things to consider when you're setting up workflow. And then the question, if you're not sure if you have a workflow, there's a very easy way to tell. So you should see workflow front and center from the moment that you create a page. If you're in XM Cloud, when you create a new page in the page builder, you should see an indication of the workflow state that you are in, and you should have some actions up here in the upper right. If you see publish instead, if you can immediately publish that page when you create it, that means that you don't have workflow enabled. So One thing I will also just mention, in case anybody is familiar with the terminology around workflow, I talked about states, commands, and actions. This is not technically an action. This is technically a command in the context of workflow. Again, usually the people submitting these things aren't looking at the technical items and crafting those workflows, but yeah, just a minor little, I tend to be a bit of a vocabulary or a language nerd, and so I like to point out those things as early as I can. So the other thing, if you're on XM or XP, you will probably be using the content editor. The content editor is also in XM Cloud as well, but you'd also get a note like this in the experience editor. So basically you just get a yellow highlight. If you publish now, the selected version will not be visible on the website because it's not in the final workflow step. If you don't see a message like that when you create content, then you don't have a workflow assigned to those pages. And if that is the case, you might want to know how you can get started with workflow. So the simplest way to get started with workflow is to assign the basic workflow, which is out of the box. So this gives you a starting point where you can approve or reject your own content. It also includes a data source action, which we'll talk about a little later. It is, again, out of the box, but someone will need to assign permissions to it. So you assign workflows to page templates on the standard values from the review tab. So if you have the appropriate permissions, if you're on XM Cloud or on version 10.0 and up, you usually assigning this to the default page template should be enough. Any other pages would typically inherit from this page. So if you go to the standard values, the review tab, and set that initial state to our basic workflow, then all of your pages are going to go through that workflow. Now, as I recommend this, I will also mention Sitecore doesn't actually recommend using this workflow. It says on their website this should not be used as an actual configuration, but as an example of a simple workflow. I'm not going to disagree there. It is definitely better to build your own workflow rather than using this. But I would say that using this workflow directly is better than having no workflow at all. Again, so long as you remember to set those permissions, those workflow permissions. But again, if you want to follow that guidance explicitly, you could have a developer install my simple two-state workflow. It's essentially the same workflow, but the benefit here is that I have already set up security. So everyone is granted permissions at the root of the workflow, so no additional work is needed. Just set that up in your website and assign it to the standard values. So this QR code will take you to my GitHub page for two-state workflow. So if you are again in the meeting right now, you can scan that QR code to go to my GitHub page, or if you're watching this on the YouTube, you should be able to again scan that as well, or maybe we will post some links in the description. Sorry, I didn't clear that with everybody. We'll see what we can do, but I'll also post my GitHub a little later as well. That is the simple way to get started. And what I would like to show is just what that is going to give you and the difference that is going to grant. And so I'm going to go ahead and show my environment here. So I have this is, again, going to be in XM Cloud, but the process would be very similar if you were on XP. So I've got some sample pages, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new subpage, and I've got a few different templates. I've got a page with without workflow, and a page with a simple workflow, and then a page with a data source friendly workflow that I'll talk about a little bit later. So again, just to reiterate, the issues on here's my page without workflow. If I create this new page, so no workflow, as soon as I create this page, it is available for publication. You'll notice, even though Andrew, the author, does not have permission to publish this page, Andrew, the admin, certainly does. So if my colleague was over here and decided to do a publish of sample pages or of the site, and they decided to publish sub pages, my default page over here with this default text is going to be published, even though, my colleague hasn't refreshed and can't see it on their page because I just created it a few seconds ago. That page would get published and go live with that dummy content. Make sure you change this before you publish. So it's not going to be applied uh, unless I had actually changed it. So that is the risk with no workflow. So with that simple workflow, if I create a page with my simple workflow, I now, again, this is in a draft state. Any publish that occurs is not going to publish this page. I can make changes to my content. I can proofread this for errors, and I can add components to the page and modify this as I like. Maybe fix some typos in the title there. And it is not going to be published until I approve that content. Again, now it's ready for publication. I don't publish this myself, but maybe an automated process publishes that later, or someone with higher permissions. Usually there's an automated process that comes along. But again, with my workflow, I've got my first version that was published. If I decide to make a change, as soon as I make that change, you'll notice when that change is saved, Sitecore will automatically create version 2. And again, version 2 needs to go live before it will overwrite, version 2 needs to be approved before it will overwrite that previously approved content on the live website. So just to highlight again where those workflows are located, if I look at my admin view in the content editor, these are down under system, workflow, and here is that basic workflow with draft, approve, approved. And here is my two-state workflow, which looks largely the same, but again, has permissions assigned. So just a simple state. We have an initial state and a final state. The initial state is defined at the workflow level. We start off in draft, and then approve takes us to our final state. So that is how we can get started with workflow. And let's see, just going to check the chat. Don't see any questions. I'll check the chat again in just a little bit. But the next thing I want to talk about is how you can take your workflows to the next level. And that is with some of the more advanced actions. So the first thing you can do is obviously set more states so that people aren't just approving their own content, that multiple folks it would have to go through multiple steps. But one of the things that really is beneficial is the data source workflow action. This was added in Sitecore version 10.0 in SXA, the Sitecore Experience Accelerator. This is also available out of the box in XM Cloud. What this is going to do is when your page is approved, it's also going to approve data sources. And this is going to be crucial when you're dealing with custom pages with multiple components. So let me show you why. So if I get back to my basic page. So I have my simple workflow page. I've got it in, I've got version 2. I have my page content. Now let's say I decide to add a rich text component to this page. So I'll drag and drop a rich text component, and here is some additional text. And So now that I've got that there, it's auto saved. I'm going to go ahead and approve. So version 2 is now ready for publishing. But there is a problem. If my workflow, if my data sources are in workflow, that publish is not going to approve those data sources in workflow. So let me just show you here. So if my admin goes back and takes a look at my workbox, you'll notice in draft, we have this text 1 item that has not been approved. So I can take a look at that text and we can see here's that additional text. So while my page title and my page content, this would go live. This component data source is not going to go live. So to really understand that, you kind of need to understand the architecture of this. And so if I look at this simple workflow page in the content editor, um, so this is under my basic site. So here is my simple workflow page. So every page in Sitecore is also an item. That item represents just content in the database. And we can see on this page item, I have a title field. There's my simple workflow field. That's where my title is coming from. And I have a content field. Make changes to my content. Here's make a change, that text you saw me enter earlier. But if I look, you won't see that rich text anywhere. And that is because that rich text is coming from a component that uses a data source, because we can add any number of rich text components onto the page. When we do that, Sitecore adds a local data source item here under data and text 1. So here is just this text item with a single field that acts as the data source for that component. But again, you'll notice if you publish now, the selected version will not be visible on the website because it is not in a final workflow step. So I would need somebody to come in and manually approve this basic data source workflow every time I want to make a change there. And that is not super efficient. We don't want to have to keep an eye on this basic data source workflow here. So this is where the data source action comes into play. So I'm going to create a new subpage with a data source friendly workflow. So I'm just going to call this data source friendly. And just to point out what the data source friendly workflow is using, because again, it all looks the same from your perspective right now. If I go back into the content editor, this is using under system workflows. This is using the basic data source workflow, which I did go in and properly assign those permissions. So when we approve that content, oh, excuse me, when we approve content with the basic workflow, it uses this data source workflow action. What this is going to do is it is going to also approve any sub items or any associated items that have this basic data source workflow. So seeing that in action, if I go and add a couple more rich text components. So here is rich text 1. Some super original names here. Rich text 2. And I'll go with rich text 3. So I've got a few more components. All of these should show up in my workbox. So yep, I've got 3 items in draft. We can see all 3 of those. And then in my basic workflow, I have this data source friendly page that I just created. But now when I go ahead and approve, if I refresh my workbox, you will see that all of those data sources were approved. So very beneficial if you are going to be, if you're going to be leveraging lots of components, your authors don't really care about the architecture of the page and whether that's a local data source or whatnot. From an authoring perspective, all you care about is what this page looks like. And when I approve this page, I want to approve all elements on the page. I don't have to go in and manually approve individual data sources. Um, let's see. And I see a question. Is this data source action workflow available in XM Cloud? Yes, it is. I'm using XM Cloud right now, and this is out of the box. SXA10X, does the data source workflow action only work for local data sources, or would it also find data sources in other locations, like a site or a data folder? It would find those data sources in other locations. So for example, if you had a promo, for example, a promo is probably going to pull from that root promos folder. Now, if I had assigned this promo to the workflow, it would be approved properly along with all of those. I actually use this for a different example. It won't, but it would if this promo was assigned in the site or data folder. So yeah, whether it's a local data source or a global data source or a site-wide data source, it's going to approve all of those data sources that are associated with your page. Great question. Thanks, Andy. So let's see. That is one way that you can take your workflows to the next level. So another way that you can do this is via actions and webhooks. So these can be used to automate different processes when a command is executed or when an item enters a given workflow states. Actions are used in XP and XM Cloud. In XP, they will execute an API call. There are also a few out-of-the-box actions like auto-publish that will automatically publish your item when it's approved, or the validation action, which is seen in the screenshot here. This will prevent your item from being approved if it contains validation errors, like, for example, if your image is missing an alt tag. These actions are also available in XM Cloud as well. But these days, as headless and composable systems become the norm, the preferred way of executing these rather than via API calls would be through webhooks, which instead, just make an HTTP request. So in Sitecore, there are two types of webhooks related to workflow. There is the webhook submit action, which you see here. This is very similar to the old standard action. This is going to hit the endpoint whenever it is triggered. So if it's assigned to a command, it will be triggered when that command is executed. If it's assigned to a state, it will be triggered when the item hits that workflow state. Then there's also the webhook validation action. This one requires a response from a third-party system before the item will be approved. So just showing how we can leverage those. I'm going to go to webhook.site. So this is a really useful site where that you can use to test webhooks. So you get a unique URL, which I'm going to go ahead and copy to the clipboard. And then I'm going to go back to my content editor. And on my basic data source workflow, I am going to add, excuse me, not my data source workflow, on my basic workflow, under approve, I'm going to add a webhook submit action. And so I'm going to call this notify. I'm going to pretend like this is going to trigger an email or some other process. I say pretend because really we're just going to use webhook.site as a sample endpoint and see what is sent here. So this is, by the way, a little technical. So for the developers, And then the main thing I need to set is enabled. If you have any authorization options, those can be customized as well. And you can set this as JSON or XML. So I'm just going to use the default settings on the most basic webhook that we have. And so now when an item goes through that approval process, it will trigger that webhook. So I've got version 2. It's back in a draft. I'm going to go ahead and approve this page. And here is my comment. Really original content here. And there we go. It does say, we'll go ahead and reload this page. But now that I've submitted that, if I go back to my webhook, we can see the data that has come through. So that notify action was submitted. We've got this data in JSON. Here are my comment. Here's my comment. And here is some information about the item itself. So again, this would be used, submitted into a third-party system. So if you're creating email notifications, for example, you can decide what content gets sent and to who. This is most useful if you've got, for example, a QA department who needs a notification when items are submitted for approval. You can, send an email and you can, customize what data gets sent there. So this is just one example of webhooks. You can do a lot with webhooks. If you haven't worked with webhooks a lot, I'd say the number one, the most useful search that I found when I was learning about webhooks was Googling API call versus webhook, or you can just ask AI, what is a webhook? These can be very useful, again, for notifications, for integrating with other systems. There's also that validation action that requires a response from that third party. If you're using that to actually validate content, that can be real useful. And then the last thing I have here is leveraging the Sitecore API in XP or GraphQL mutations in XP or headless systems. So if you need to do some really complex actions and you're a developer, you can use the API or GraphQL mutations to move items through a workflow. So ultimately, your workflow state is defined by regular fields in the database. So we can modify that programmatically just like we can with any field. So in XP, this would primarily be done through the API by putting the item into an editing state and then editing any field values. It's just a matter of knowing the name of the field that you would want to edit, which in this case is __ workflow state. So you can define what state to move this to. In XM Cloud or on headless implementations, we would do this with a GraphQL mutation. And so and again, all of this is available on the Sitecore documentation website. I don't actually have a demo for this one, but I think the most useful way to leverage this would be to put it on a component on a staging server. So if, for example, you need legal to sign off on something or QA, you can put that on a staging server, a preview server, and then they can approve or reject that content without ever needing to log into Sitecore. So usually a department like legal or honestly, even QA or QC, they might not have Sitecore credentials. They're probably not going to be doing a lot of work in Sitecore. So giving them the ability to approve or reject that content without a login will be super helpful for everybody's time. And particularly if you're already near your limits as far as concurrent users go, giving someone an account just to sign off on a piece of content, probably not the most efficient way to leverage those concurrent users. So again, I don't currently have a demo for this one, but I'm hoping to have an example in the blog series that I'm creating. That was originally the companion post for this presentation when I was going to be presenting it at the Minneapolis user group last week. I canceled that, so I started expanding my blog post, and then Maulik gave me the opportunity to present here. So it's now again a companion post, but it has not been posted yet. So If you follow me on the socials, I'll be posting that very soon. And again, hoping to have an example of that GraphQL mutation that you could use for workflow. And I thought I had another example. I mentioned the promo. So one thing I will just mention here is um, uh, I, so I specifically did not put the promo in a workflow because I wanted to point out this is another pitfall to watch for is if you are using workflows but you have content like your promo that is not in a workflow, it um, some content changes can slip through the cracks and not require approval. So for example, even though my page is approved, if I go ahead and modify this test promo, this is a change. If I change that content, even if I change the image um, to something else, you will notice that did not trigger any automatic versioning. And that's again because this date I didn't modify the current page. All I modified was the data source. So if that data source was part of workflow, the data source would have triggered a new version. But the page has not seen any changes, so it's not getting any automatic versioning there. This is a little less of a concern if you're on XP, because in XP, before you can make those changes, you need to hit lock and edit. So the automatic versioning happens when you hit lock and edit, but it is something that's useful to be aware of, again, especially if you have workflow on your pages, but not on your data source items. So, but let's see. So with that, one other thing I just want to mention, you've probably heard about a little event going on next week called Sitecore Symposium. For those of you that are attending, I highlighted a few presentations to look for. Let's see. Just to point those out, one thing I will say about this, what I did was I searched the agenda for workflow, and most, if not all, of the presentations I'm going to be mentioning here, when they talk about workflow, they are not talking about the Sitecore entity that is a workflow that's listed under settings workflows. They are talking about the more broad idea of workflow and how that work gets passed through. You're going to hear a lot of, especially these days, agentic workflows. People are talking about using AI, agentic workflows, and modifying your workflow with AI. They're talking about the more general idea of the creation of work. So again, with all of the AI involved in that workflow, I think understanding the technical ways that workflow functions in Sitecore is more important than ever because again, you want to keep that human oversight, but there's a lot of exciting things going on with AI and how those can modify your work processes. So I'll go ahead and call out, these are in order starting on Tuesday. So how a global manufacturer rewrote its customer experience story with Sitecore. We've got Sitecore's AI roadmap, how agentic frameworks will transform digital experience. Creating an AI-powered content supply chain for regulatory markets using Sitecore. This one will talk about workflow. And AI in 5, from idea to implementation with Sitecore and Gradial. Gradial is a very cool platform. If you're going to Symposium, highly recommend checking out as much as you can with Gradial. And again, they are very much talking about the broader idea of workflows, not specifically Sitecore workflows, but it's especially, I'm very excited about AI that's more than just generative text. Gradial is one to keep an eye on. And then let's see, harnessing AI for content creation, introducing AI experience generation for XM Cloud. And then I think I might be into day 2. Let's see, from Figma to front end, accelerating XM Cloud with design systems, AI, and Fastlane. Nope, and here we go. Those were all day 1 presentations. On Wednesday, day 2, we have agentic AI, myths, realities, and the human role in the next revolution. Navigating AI readiness, it's not what you think. and accelerating publish to view, fast content-driven XM Cloud applications with Next.js and Vercel. So just a number of presentations to keep your eye out for at Symposium if you happen to be going. But that is the end of my presentation. So thanks to those of you who showed up to the Zoom call. Thanks to everyone who's watching on YouTube. And just to let you know a little bit about me, again, my name is Andrew View. I'm a Sitecore contractor based out of Minnesota. I did work at Sitecore for over 10 years, wearing a number of different hats. I think most people would know me from my days as a technical trainer, like Maulik mentioned, especially helping folks get certified on XP or XM Cloud. But beyond that, I've done training and enablement for the entire Sitecore stack and from a variety of perspectives. I've taught workshops and written e-learning courses for business users, marketers, and developers, both on .NET MVC as well as Next.js. Since joining the contracting world and working with the Sitecore community, most recently I became a co-organizer of SUG-MSP, the Minneapolis-St. Paul user group, which we ran last week. Was very exciting. And if you enjoyed this presentation, please reach out and connect on LinkedIn, which is my mostly the only social media I'm active on these days. And let's see, yeah, I'm currently working on a contract through the end of May, which is actually at Sitecore. But if you are looking for someone to help on any of your Sitecore projects next year, I'd love to hear from you. I'm available in May. So thanks so much for the opportunity to present, and happy Halloween, and enjoy Symposium for anybody that's going. Let's see.
Thank you.
Any other questions as we finish up?
Thanks, Andrew. This was so great. So about quickly on the promo one, so it doesn't tell you if you have added or modified anything. So is the only option to actually add data source in the workflow? That seems to me is a bit problematic if we don't tell content author that you made a change, but there is no publishing action here.
Yeah, so right now, and again, I think from an authoring perspective, it would be a bit of a red. Ideally, if they would understand that usually, their content would need to get an approval. So the red flag here would be, well, hey, I just made a change, but it didn't approve, didn't make a new version. So there's a couple of options. They could manually create that new version. They could make a change on the page itself. But you're right, that is kind of an oversight that I do expect will be addressed at some point. This is specific to XM Cloud, and again, especially if you don't have workflow enabled, it's kind of unique situation. I would say there's a big opportunity if you've heard about the marketplace API that's been released, or the marketplace SDK that's been released for XM Cloud. Great opportunity there for tweaking workflows, leveraging those GraphQL mutations to do any kind of customizations. Although I do think this is something that will probably be addressed, because especially if it's an issue that happens a lot. To my knowledge, it doesn't happen to anyone outside of the classroom. This is just one that I would occasionally see with my workshops. So
yeah, okay, thanks. So another question I have is there any way to actually scheduling the publishing action?
So the way to schedule to publish is if you go into the publishing availability. So just like in XP, we can specify that to be published at a later date. You can choose the date and time. And typically this is involved with an automated publish. So I know a recurring publish is possible in XM Cloud. I worked at a company that published every night at midnight, for example. And so if I wanted this to go live on Halloween morning, I would schedule it to publish at 11:55 p.m. Tonight. And then I know that that midnight publish would pick it up. So that's the typical way that the automated publishing and the scheduling of the publishing is done.
But then, like, the workflow state has to be, like, in a publish mode so that, like, it's all approved and everything. And then, like, as it's scheduled, it will be published at that time. So, like, not a question, but more of like, um, a statement, I think from my part. Yeah, that's great. And I think the agentic one is really interesting. Like, I think if agentic AI is part of the workflow, then it can like, check the content and, like, although the human will be on the loop, it can get a lot of work done before someone is looking at it, right? So that's
I agree. Yeah, the stuff when I hear people, the things I'm hearing about like agentic workflows and agentic AI and all of that stuff, it sounds really exciting. Workflow in general, I think most people don't find this particularly exciting. I love it. I geek out on this stuff. I really I found there have been if you look through the Sitecore case studies, there have been some really impressive gains that folks have gotten just by enabling workflow, enabling that process on faster time to market, fewer errors and whatnot. So I hope that I took this boring topic and made it at least a little bit exciting for some of you.
yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment, Andy.
Yep.
And yeah,
So
thanks for inviting me to the 50th session. It's an honor
thank you.
to be presenting.
Yeah. Yep. Great. One thing which I noticed last year when I was working on XM Cloud and Content Hub both, that Sitecore workflows are inheritable. So I create one particular group. I can inherit the Sitecore content editor and Sitecore publisher into that particular group, the role into one another role, and then assign that role to different team members. On other hand, for Content Hub, I had to give workflow permission to each and every individual user. There was there was a group role, but I have to assign role to that one. There wasn't any inheritance or anything like that. So it was little bit confusing for Content Hub, but it is Content Hub. It is not Sitecore.
That makes sense. I actually, you should have the ability to create roles in Content Hub. The permission is a little bit different in Content Hub.
Yes.
Content Hub is like allow only. They don't have the idea of the explicit deny. So it's
Yeah.
A little bit simpler, a little bit less granular with the permissions, but you should be able to assign user roles and not have to assign that on every individual
No,
user.
I remember now it was assigned to user role. I was not able to inherit the role into another role. Say I have Sitecore default role is there and I want to create something different. I cannot inherit that role and add on top of that. Where with Sitecore everything is possible.
That makes sense. And I think you kind of can, like for example, you can create a second role in Content Hub that would supplement those user permissions, but yeah, you would need to assign both. You can't
Yeah,
you can't make your advanced user
complexity is more.
permissions also assign user permissions. A member would have to be a member of both.
Yeah. No, this was really good session and learned about the workflow structure in XM Cloud as well. So that's a good thing. Cool. Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much. Glad
much.
to hear it.
Thank
So
you.
reach out on social,
You.
connect on LinkedIn. I know I'm connected with you already, but yeah.
Yeah. Any questions, anyone?
I think we are good. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you as well.
Thank
Happy
you,
Halloween.
everyone. Bye.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.